And we talk about how, there's a lot of weakness in the currency. How is that impacting your businesses? You have businesses pretty much across the region.
Yes, well, as you said, Haslinda, we're pretty much diversified. We have businesses in Vietnam, in Australia, India, and Indonesia, and a little bit in the U.S. So with this diversification, it actually helps us manage the volatility, including currency volatility. As you know, as a de facto export business, that strengthens the value of our international business as and when we repatriate back to the Philippines. Although, of course, that's not actionable at this point because we're a growth company and we typically reinvest at this point any operating cash flows into expansion and growth. But overall, obviously, with significant exposure in the Australian dollar, US dollar, it is good hedge against the peso weakness.
Is there concern about debt, US-denominated debt that you may have?
Not necessarily, because our policy, our internal company policy, is to match the currency of the revenues with the debt. So we have a perfect match either through a natural matching or hedging. So we don't have exposure in terms of currency mismatch when it comes to debt.
Of course, we know that when it comes to your renewable capacity, you have a big ambition of getting to 20 gigawatts. Where are you with that, and what's the plan to ramp it all up?
Well, we're now currently at around 5 gigawatts of operating and under construction capacity. If you count the projects that we have already signed agreements, but subject to conditions precedent, we're well above that, closer to 6 gigawatts. So it's a very strong momentum. We targeted 5 gigawatts by 2025, but we actually essentially achieved that 2 years ahead of schedule. There's good momentum. Obviously, with the uncertainty and volatility around the world, we need to calibrate the growth. Doesn't mean that we will necessarily slow down, but it's more of a calibrated approach. For example, with rising interest rates, you just need to plan ahead that as and when the rates taper, that's when you step on the gas pedal again. So that's the theme. Some of our shovel-ready projects, if you will, we may just need to exercise a little bit of patience. Anywhere, overall, we are ahead of plan, so we have the luxury of being more patient in terms of hitting the green go-ahead button.
How about in terms of your projects like the floating solar project? How is that coming along? How is that contributing to your overall targets?
Well, the floating solar in the Philippines is a huge one. We have 800 hectares on the lake, that could enable 1,000 megawatts of solar. We've been experiencing a string of red and yellow alerts in the Philippines, as you very well know, the past few days. Much more capacity is needed. It does take time because it's a new technology. We are now in the process of going for the permits, getting the permits, and it's going to take time, but we will certainly get there. In the meantime, we're full speed ahead with expansions in some of our onshore wind projects and ground-mounted solar. And in fact, we're already operating today. We have over 500 megawatts of solar plant in the Philippines that was recently operational, providing a lot of much needed power to the grid. So especially during summer, because that's the peak production of solar. So it helps a lot in a very tight situation. But we need to roll out much more.
You talk about expansion within the Philippines.
Yes.
How about expansion, expanding your footprint around the region? Are there plans to do that within the next 12, 24 months, for instance?
Yes, certainly. Australia is our largest market outside of the Philippines. So there's a lot of activity there. We just recently signed an MOU with Marubeni on a 200 megawatt battery storage because the country needs it. Australia, as they're forging ahead with the energy transition, you need to balance the intermittency of renewables with a lot of storage. Vietnam, we're doing cross-border as well. We're involved in a large, the first and the largest wind project from Laos exporting to Vietnam. We're doing some expansion in India as well, which is a very large market. But obviously, Philippines remains our core. That accounts for 40% at least of our business, and there is a dire need for renewables expansion in the Philippines. So we're pretty much focused as well on scaling, accelerating the scale up in the Philippines.
Can you put a number to your expansion plans? both in the Philippines as well as overseas?
We're now at 5 gigawatts, and we still are targeting 20 gigawatts.
But in terms of investment money, funding that you're putting there?
Over the balance of the decade, we're going to look at 15,000 megawatts or 15 gigawatts will require about $15 billion of capital, of which 40% will come from the Philippines. So that's where we'd be looking to invest around $6 billion of capital, at least in the Philippines over the next 6 years or so, or roughly about $1 billion of capex in the Philippines.
So all this will contribute to you becoming ASEAN's largest listed renewable platform, or
that's the ambition, that's the aspiration, and I think we have a lot of momentum and getting strong support from our partners, from the banks, from financial institutions. So I think there's a lot of momentum for doing this renewables push.
Eric, we also know that you're doing some drilling. You're leading a consortium in the South China Sea. How is that coming along?
Well, no, we're not doing any drilling there.
But a unit of yours is leading a consortium?
No, we're not involved there. We do have a unit that has a oil and gas service contract, but given that we're renewables focused now, we're not putting any capital behind the drilling, but we're actively looking for the right sponsor to de-risk that, because as you very well know, the Philippines needs as much indigenous resource as it can muster. Malampaya is declining, but prime infrastructure is already doing the drilling program to expand and to extend Malampaya. There are other service contracts that are promising. Our subsidiary has one of them, but unfortunately, because we're renewables focused, we're not going to be de-risking that by ourselves.
Energy, of course, a big issue, as you said, in the Philippines. Where are we with how the Philippines is gearing towards its renewable transition?
Well, the Department of Energy definitely has set the right goals and policies in place, targeting 35% renewable output by 2030. We're currently at 22%, and further expanding to 50% by 2040. It's a large goal. By our estimation, we would need to construct new capacity of around 18 gigawatts of renewables capacity between now and 2030, and well over 50 gigawatts by 2040 to reach those DOE targets, as well as to address the growing demand of the Philippines, which is still growing at around 5% per annum. So it's a big task ahead, and that's why we are bullish and working hard to help reach those goals. One of the key constraints is transmission line, of course, and that's why we're working closely with the grid operator and the policymakers to ensure that this infrastructure is built. In our case, we have actually invested upfront quite a bit of transmission connection infrastructure to enable large-scale solar plants that can later on be incorporated with battery storage to make them more reliable and decrease our need for fossil fuel plants, which, by the way, back to the theme of foreign exchange, fossil fuel plants, for coal, for example, half of the cost of electricity is linked to fuel, which is quite volatile in terms of commodity price and foreign exchange. And gas is about 70 to 80% of the electricity price of gas is linked again to gas prices and Forex. So to be able to really accelerate the scale-up of renewables and battery storage, that will help us not only hedge in terms of energy security and less reliance on imports, but also fix the price, because once you lock in, it's mostly capex. There's no marginal cost. There's no fuel to talk about. So it's a good balance, and hopefully the Department of Energy will create the policies to really push renewables and storage in the Philippines. Are
there measures that can be implemented to expedite, policies even, to expedite that transition?
Yes, absolutely. And I've been in Ecosperity here in Singapore, and one of the measures or mechanisms that we are piloting with the support of Monetary Authority of Singapore and the Rockefeller Foundation's Coal to Clean Credit Initiative is this notion of transition credits, which is a form of carbon credits, high-integrity carbon credits that entail the early closure of coal plants and the replacement with clean energy. So as I was explaining in the forum, these the transition credits will help us accelerate further the retirement of the coal plant that we have influence on. This is 246 megawatts, to bring up the retirement from 2040 to 2030. But the responsible thing to do, given the tightness in the market, supply demand in the Philippines, is to replace that with clean, reliable, and affordable energy. So our clean energy solution will entail not only building the ample amount of solar and wind farm, but also energy storage. And that will be funded in part by the transition credit proceeds, because battery storage as it stands today for that use case is not economical. But with the use of transition credits, the thesis is it will make it economical and feasible.